They torched her home with laughter in their throats, 5 men on horseback, riding like devils with kerosene hearts. Clara Whitmore lost everything in a matter of minutes. The barn, the cabin, her husband's legacy, turned to ash. On the gatepost, they left a message in red. Should have sold. But what they didn't see, what they never saw, was the figure watching from the tree line. Still, silent, waiting. A Sioux warrior, scarred by war, shaped by loss. He had watched fire take everything before. But this time, he wasn't turning away. Because in the woman who refused to scream, he saw something buried deep, something worth saving. And when the smoke cleared, he made his vow. The flames took her past. He'd give her a future. Clara Whitmore wasn't born of the West, but the land had claimed her all the same. She arrived in the Wyoming Territory 12 years prior, a new bride with soft hands and city shoes that sank in the mud. Elias Whitmore, her husband, had chased a horizon with a dream of cattle and cornfields. He built their homestead with timber from the mountain and sweat from his brow. 2 rooms, a barn, a chicken coop held together by wire and stubbornness. They named it Whitmore Hollow, a small patch of prairie, surrounded by rolling hills and cottonwood trees. After Elias died, sickness in the lungs, fast and cruel neighbors whispered that Clara would pack up and head back east. But she stayed. She learned the way of the land, learned how to plow in spring and harvest in fall, how to load a rifle and ride into town alone, how to weather storms, snake bites, and men who looked at a lone widow like she was just another piece of property left behind. Clara wasn't fearless, but she was tired of losing. Each morning, she hauled water from the creek, fed the hens, repaired the fence Elias built, and each night, she lit a single oil lamp and read from his Bible 1 page, 1 prayer at a time. Her world was quiet, her life modest, but it was hers. She sold eggs and milk to the traders that passed through, fixed quilts in exchange for nails and sugar, never asked for help, and never gave more than she could afford to lose. But one soul came anyway. His name was Little Elk. Young, tall, and silent, he came with the first frost each year, bringing smoked meat and cedar bundles. Never knocked, never spoke unless spoken to. Clara offered him cornbread and coffee. In return, he stacked firewood and left with the setting sun. They never spoke of friendship, but something deeper sat in the space between them, an unspoken understanding. 2 souls stitched with loss, bound not by blood, but by the weight they carried. Clara didn't know much about him, only that he came from the north and bore the scars of a warrior's life. A long mark crossed his chest like a lightning bolt carved in flesh. His eyes held the kind of silence that came from seeing too much, too young. Some in town called him savage, said he shouldn't be on white land. Clara didn't care. He never asked for anything, and she never forgot the first winter he showed up, just as her firewood ran out. That night, he left a bundle outside her door and vanished into the snow. Year after year, he returned, not with words, but with presence. In a place where wind could strip a woman of hope, his silence was a kind of strength. For a while, life held steady. Crops grew. The hens laid. Clara even smiled again, sometimes, when she heard the distant coyote yowls at night, knowing they were out there and she was still standing. The prairie didn't offer much, but it offered peace. And in the West, that was worth more than gold. But peace has a way of drawing envy. And in the distance, over the hills where the trail split, came the rumble of new wagons and the stink of ambition, the kind of ambition that doesn't ask permission. It takes. And Clara's quiet life was about to catch fire. It started small. Surveyor stakes showed up one morning, driven into her eastern pasture like little wooden threads. She yanked them out and tossed them into the stove without a second thought. 2 days later, Ezra Dayton himself showed up. He didn't knock, just stood on her porch, hand resting casually on the pistol at his hip. "Miss Whitmore," he said, voice slow and syrupy, "you're sitting on land that's got a future." Clara crossed her arms. "Funny. Looked like it had chickens and turnips last I checked. He chuckled, but it didn't reach his eyes. People with vision, real vision, see more than dirt and weeds. They see opportunity, profit, progress. And vultures, Clara shot back. They see carrion. Ezra's smile faltered. I'm offering you a way out, darling. A clean sale. Cash up front. You don't want to be in the way when the cattle come stampeding through. I've survived drought wolves and 5 winters without Elias, she said, eyes locked on his. You think cattle scare me? Ezra took a step closer, his boot landing with a thud on her porch. That wasn't a question, Clara. Then he tipped his hat and walked away, leaving silence behind him. The wind picked up, the prairie whispered, and something in Clara's bones told her that a storm had started, and it wasn't one she could outrun. That night, she sat by the fire with Elias's Bible on her lap, but her hands didn't turn the pages. They were clenched in her lap, ready, waiting. The West had tested her before, but this time, it wouldn't be sickness or storms that tried to take her home. It would be men, and men could bleed. The first time Clara saw Ezra Dayton, he was leaning against the hitching post outside the general store, chewing on a twig like he owned the whole town. He had the kind of grin that didn't reach his eyes, and suspenders stained with sweat and tobacco juice. A wide man with shoulders like barn doors, and a gut that spoke of easy meals and easier power. Behind him stood his 2 sons, Will and Hank, barely out of boyhood, but already mean from the inside out. Hank had a broken tooth and eyes like dull knives. Will was quieter, but his gaze lingered too long on anything he thought he might one day own. They called themselves settlers. But everyone in town knew better. The Daytons came with cash, too much of it, and bought up the old O'Hara ranch on the edge of town. Folks said they paid double what it was worth, no questions asked. Within a week, they started pushing fences where no fences belonged. Within 2, Ezra was at the saloon, buying rounds and talking loud. Open range is a dead man's dream, he told the crowd. Railroad's coming through. Cattle's gonna flood this valley. And when that happens, you'll wish you were on my side of the wire. He looked around, daring someone to challenge him. No one did. But Clara wasn't in that saloon. She was home, repairing the west fence line. It was Little Elk who warned her first. New men. Take much. Leave nothing. She nodded, more tired than surprised, like so many before them. But she didn't expect them to come for her. The next morning, Clara found her well had run dry. At first, she thought it might be the drought, but when she opened the cover, she saw the truth, staring back up at her wads of burlap and packed mud jammed into the pump pipe. Sabotage. She spent the better part of the day with her arms elbow-deep in cold water and grit, pulling it apart bit by bit, muttering curses Elias would have winced at. When she finally cleared it and the pump sputtered back to life, she didn't smile. She just looked out across the prairie, toward the fence line, and the Daytons. Later that week, her hens began to vanish. First 1, then 3, then half the coop gone in a single night. Feathers strewn like confetti through the yard. Tracks led east, crude and deliberate. Someone hadn't even bothered to hide them. Boots. Big ones. 2 sets. She followed the trail halfway across her pasture before turning back. She already knew where it ended, and she already knew the sheriff wouldn't do a damn thing. Sheriff Mallory was a man who looked like he'd been carved out of old leather, creased, worn, and too tired to care. His badge hung crooked on his vest, and he smelled like cheap rye even before noon. Clara rode into town and slammed a boot on his desk. They're bleeding me dry, Sheriff. I want justice. Mallory barely looked up. No proof, Clara. Lot of folks got boots. Lot of chickens go missing. And if I find my hens roasting on Dayton's fire pit. He sighed. Best keep your head down. Men like Ezra, they don't stop just 'cause you shout. She turned without a word and left the office door, swinging behind her. That evening, she found a pile of feathers at the edge of her land. The necks had been broken clean. A warning. Little Elk showed up, just before sundown. He didn't knock. Never did. Clara was chopping wood, her blouse damp with sweat, her jaw clenched. "They're coming for it all," she said, piece by piece. Little Elk nodded. "They do not take. They steal." He reached behind him and set something against the cabin wall. A bow. A quiver. Roughly carved, feathers fletched with care. "Not for hunt," he said, eyes locked on hers. For warning. She stared at the bow, then at the man who brought it. "I haven't touched one of those since Elias died," she whispered. "Now you live," he replied. "So fight." That night, Clara didn't sleep. She sat by the window, bow across her lap, watching the wind move through the grass. The Datons didn't come, but the prairie felt different, quieter, like something was holding its breath. The next day, someone cut her fence. Not once, but in 3 places. Enough to let in coyotes. Enough to send a message. And in the center of her pasture, driven into the earth like a dagger, was one of her missing hens tied to a post by the neck. Blood still fresh. That was the moment Clara knew. This wasn't about cattle. This wasn't about grazing rights or land surveys. Ezra Dayton wanted her gone. Burned out or carried out, it didn't matter. He wanted to erase her, and the law wouldn't lift a finger. But Clara wasn't ready to vanish. Not yet. She picked up the bow Little Elk had given her, slid the quiver over her shoulder, and stepped onto the porch as the sky began to turn gold. She didn't know what came next, but she knew one thing for sure. If the Datons wanted a war, they'd get one. It came on a windless evening, the kind of still that makes your neck itch. No birdsong, no crickets, just the long hum of silence waiting to break. Clara had ridden into town that day to trade eggs, what few she had left for nails and lamp oil. She took her time, half from pride, half from the heaviness in her chest she couldn't quite name. When she crested the hill on her way home, the sky told her everything. Smoke, black, thick, climbing fast into the blue. She kicked her mare into a gallop, heart pounding with every hoofbeat, dread curling like a snake in her gut. By the time she reached her homestead, it was already too late. The barn was a skeleton aflame. The roof had caved in, beams collapsing like picked bones. Her cabin, Elias's cabin, was ablaze from the inside out, glass shattered from the heat. The chicken coop was nothing but a pile of charred wire and ash. The heat pushed her back. She dropped the sack of goods and ran to the garden, eyes wild, throat raw from smoke and screaming. But no one was there. No one but her. She circled the cabin like a ghost, knees buckling as the roof gave way with a final groan. Gone. All of it. Gone. And then she saw it. On the fence post near the well half-burnt, the wood cracked from the blaze, someone had scrawled a message in red. Should have sold. Paint. No. Blood. Clara stumbled backward, hand to her mouth. Her vision blurred, but she didn't cry. She just stood there, ash in her hair, smoke clinging to her skin, fists clenched so tight her nails cut crescent moons into her palms. Night fell slow. She didn't move. She couldn't. It wasn't until the moon rose high that she finally dropped to her knees, beneath the old oak tree behind the house. She sat there, surrounded by what used to be her life, what used to be him. The scorched earth where Elias was buried still steamed. Her fingers found his Bible, half-burned, the edges curled, the leather cracked. She pulled it to her chest and rocked slowly, whispering words to a man who could no longer hear. But someone else could. At dawn, Little Elk appeared, silent, like always. He said nothing when he saw the ruin, just stood beside her, long shadow stretching across the ash. He crouched, picked up a charred bit of cloth that had once been a curtain, and let it fall through his fingers. Clara didn't look up. "They did it," she said hoarsely. "Ezra and his boys." Little Elk nodded once. "I don't have a home anymore," she whispered. Now he spoke. "You have fire." His voice was quiet, steady. "And you have me." She turned her head, eyes burning brighter than the embers around her. "What do I do now?" He stood and offered her a hand. "We rebuild," he said. Then his jaw tightened, and for the first time since she'd met him, Clara saw something hard and old flicker behind his eyes. "Then we make them remember." Little Elk didn't lead Clara back to town. He led her into the wild. 3 days' ride north, through cedar groves and dry gulches, across hills where no trail held and no law dared follow. On the 4th day, just as her muscles ached to breaking, they crested a narrow ridge, and the world opened. A hidden valley stretched below them, shielded by trees, ringed by red rock cliffs, and within it life. Smoke curled from low stone fires. Horses grazed near a stream. Tents of hide and timber stood in quiet defiance of a world that had tried to forget them. Clara blinked, breath catching. "Is this your tribe?" Little Elk shook his head. "No. What remains?" They rode down slow. Children watched from behind skirts and barrels. Elders nodded with wary eyes. Every face carried history etched deep lines of hunger, survival, and things no settler town would ever bother to understand. He led her to the largest tent, where an old man sat cross-legged on a buffalo robe. His braid was silver, his eyes sharp as eagle talons. "Gray Fox." He studied Clara like a man reading a storm. "She carries smoke," he said, "but no fear." Little Elk spoke in Sioux, voice low and fast. Clara caught only a few words. "Fire." Dayton stole an oath. Gray Fox nodded, then turned to her. "Your blood is not ours, but your wound is." Clara met his gaze. "They took everything." The old man pointed to the ground. "And so have they." He showed her a map, hand-drawn, faded from age. It showed creeks and ridges long erased by new fences. Then he tapped a corner of her land. "That was once our hunting ground, before the Iron Men came, before the treaties burned." Clara frowned. "You're saying, Ezra's cattle scheme, it's not just about me?" "No," Little Elk said. "It's about taking again, just like before." That night, they sat by the fire. Clara told her story, all of it, from Elias's death to the chickens to the flames. And in return, they told her theirs. Names of villages that no longer existed, graves unmarked, children taken to schools that weren't schools. The next morning, something changed. Clara didn't just feel angry. She felt connected, not by blood, but by loss, and by the same enemy. For the next 2 weeks, she stayed in the valley. The women taught her how to weave traps, how to preserve meat, how to blend into the land. The men taught her how to fight, not with guns, with silence, with bows, with blades, with knowing when to move and when to wait. Clara bled, bruised, fell, but never stopped. And Little Elk, he trained beside her. But he also disappeared some nights, vanishing into the hills without a word. When he returned, he brought pieces. Ezra's cattle herd, scattered. His southern fence, torn down. A wagon overturned, burned to the axles. And on Ezra's front door, a symbol carved deep. A feather over flame. When Ezra saw it, he paled. He didn't tell anyone why. But at night, his hand trembled when he poured whiskey. Because long ago, when he wore Union blue, he'd led a raid on a Sioux village, killed the chief, burned the lodges, left a boy bleeding in the snow. That boy had survived, and had carved that same feather into his own chest when he came of age. Ezra knew. Little Elk hadn't forgotten. And now, he wasn't fighting alone. He was fighting with a widow who had nothing left to lose. One morning, as dawn broke over the valley, Clara stood beside Little Elk in her rebuilt cabin, smaller, sturdier, high on the ridge above her old land. She wore a new dress, rough spun, practical, but her hands were calloused, and her eyes no longer searched for mercy, only momentum. "This is your land," Little Elk said. "You choose what comes next." Clara looked out at the prairie, at the town that turned its back, at the man who thought fire would erase her. She took a breath that tasted like cedar and cold wind. "Then it's time we remind them," she said. "Some fires don't die. They wait." It started with whispers. That Clara Whitmore was back. That she'd rebuilt on higher ground, with stronger walls, and rode into town with fire in her eyes. But it wasn't just her return that got folks shifting in their boots. It was the way she rode in, tall in the saddle, a bow slung across her back, a knife at her hip, her mare black as a thundercloud, and behind her, Little Elk, walking barefoot, calm as a ghost. No one said a word when she passed the saloon. Even the men playing cards paused mid-hand. She tied her horse outside the general store, dusted her coat, and walked straight toward the sheriff's office. Sheriff Mallory stepped out, his face pale, sweat already blooming under his hat. "Miss Whitmore." "Don't miss me, Sheriff," she said, voice flat. "You've been doing just fine." He swallowed hard. "Now just hold on. No need for blood. Let's talk." But she was already past him, headed for the Datons' place. Ezra's ranch sat smug at the edge of town, too big, too clean, too new. He was on the porch when she arrived, rocking slow in a chair like he'd been expecting her. His pistol rested in his lap. "Look what the wind dragged in," he drawled, smirking. Clara dismounted slow, deliberate. "You burned my home," she said. "You stole my stock. You scared good people into silence." Ezra leaned forward. "You got proof of that, sweetheart." She didn't answer, because she didn't need to. Little Elk stepped out from the alley. No words, just the sudden glint of steel in the sun as he planted his spear in the dirt, point down. The crowd had gathered by then, silent, watching. Will and Hank appeared in the doorway, hands twitching near their holsters. Ezra stood, cocky grin fading just a shade. "You think I'm scared of that Injun?" Clara took a step closer. "No," she said. "You're scared of what he remembers." Ezra flinched, just a flicker, but she saw it. "He knows what you did," she said. "And now so do they." She gestured to the townsfolk gathering around. The blacksmith, the seamstress, the barber, even old Reverend Griggs, hands folded behind his back. All of them had lived in fear, and all of them had now seen the woman who refused to kneel. Ezra's voice turned brittle. "This is cattle land. I got papers." "And I've got ashes," Clara snapped. Then Little Elk moved, fast as lightning. Will drew first, but never got the shot off. The warrior's hand clamped around his wrist, slammed it into the doorframe with a sickening crack. Hank lunged. A flash of movement, then he was on the ground, staring up at the sky, breath gone. Ezra raised his pistol but didn't fire. Not when Little Elk stared him down, still as a coiled hawk. Instead, Ezra turned to Clara, eyes wild. "This is war," he spat. Clara nodded. "No, this is the end of it." And then the sheriff stepped forward, badge polished, rifle in hand. "Ezra Dayton," he said, louder than he'd spoken in months. "You're under arrest for arson, intimidation, destruction of property, and whatever else Miss Whitmore and her friend care to add." Ezra's jaw dropped. "You can't be serious." "You said." Mallory cut him off. "Times change." He nodded at Little Elk. "And so do the people who protect this town." Ezra lunged, but he didn't get far. Clara stepped in, quick as a striking snake, and drove the heel of her boot into his knee. He dropped, howling, pistol clattering uselessly to the porch. She stood over him, breathing hard, not triumphant, not smiling, just done. Mallory snapped cuffs on his wrists as the crowd began to murmur, not in fear, in approval, in relief. Ezra Dayton had ruled with money and fear. But fear only works until someone decides they've had enough. And today, that someone was a widow with nothing left to burn. Ezra Dayton never made it out of the territory. They sent him east, chained and scowling, to a judge who didn't drink with him on Sundays. His sons disappeared into the hills, their names cursed quietly behind wagons and saloon doors. No one missed them, and the land began to breathe again. Without Dayton money choking the sheriff's hand, or fencing off trails that didn't belong to him, the valley opened. Neighbors who'd stayed silent found their voices again. A schoolhouse was built where the old O'Hara barn once leaned, and the fence line Clara had mended 100 times was finally left alone. But Clara didn't return to the hollow. She let the ashes rest. Instead, she built on the ridge higher ground, overlooking what used to be hers. The new cabin was smaller, tighter, with thick logs and shuttered windows. But it had a porch that caught the morning sun just right, and a new chicken coop already clucking with life. The Bible, scorched and brittle, still sat on the bedside table. Next to it, resting on a simple wooden shelf, was something new. An arrowhead. Smooth, dark, carved with markings she couldn't read, but felt in her bones. Little Elk never moved in. That wasn't his way. But he came often, to share a quiet fire, to leave wildflowers wrapped in cedar bark, to bring stories from the valley, where more of his people had returned slowly, like deer testing open ground. He never spoke of Ezra again. He didn't have to. Neither did Clara. They had both seen what fire could do. But they'd also seen what came after. Spring brought peach blossoms. The trees he helped plant took root near Elias's grave. Clara knelt there once, hand on the soil, and whispered something only the wind heard. She didn't smile much, but when she did, it was real. She took in orphan girls from the mining camps, taught them to read, to shoot, to plant, to survive. And when folks asked how she managed it all, she'd just say, "Had good teachers." Some said she was just a widow who got lucky. Some said the Sioux had saved her. But the truth? Clara Whitmore saved herself. With ash on her skin and iron in her spine. With silence beside her and strength born of loss. They tried to burn her out. But fire doesn't just destroy. Sometimes it forges. And out on the edge of the frontier, beneath skies that never seemed to end, one woman and one warrior lit something the Datons could never touch. Hope. Tales from the dusty trail. Wind howls soft through the canyon. A black mare grazes under a peach tree. Somewhere out in the wild, a warrior watches the ridge and smiles. Fade to dust. Fade to silence. Fade to legend.